Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Rubicon Masonic Society, we are happy to see you again this evening for Quality Masonic Education. This is episode 9 of our 2021 Virtual Masonic Education series entitled 21st Century Conversations on Freemasonry. We sincerely hope that this series encourages deeper thoughts and thinking and questions that bring you closer to Freemasonry, closer to your brothers, and closer to your lodges. Each meeting will deliver a specific presentation given on a Masonic topic, followed by live discussion for all to participate in. For those of you who are returning tonight, thank you for coming back. And for those of you who are new, we welcome you and thank you for being with us again this evening. First, I would like to go through the protocols and recognize the Masonic sponsors and participating brothers therein who, without your support, this virtual education would not be possible. First, my sincere thanks and appreciation to everyone at the Rubicon Masonic Society. The Rubicon Masonic Society is an invitation-only private group of Master Mason Freemasons located in Lexington, Kentucky. The purpose of Rubicon is to establish a deeper understanding and a deeper connection with Freemasonry, with its traditions and practices, and further cementing the brotherhood of its members and guests through conviviality and unity outside of the lodge. The Ware Lodge of Research is dedicated to helping brothers pursue further light in Masonry. It was chartered in 1965. It is Kentucky's oldest research lodge. The lodge was named after most worshipful brother, William Ware, who served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky in his 1957-58 term. And lastly, Lexington Lodge No. 1, which was chartered in 1788, is the oldest Masonic lodge in Kentucky. The lodge has historic membership, including senators, congressmen, governors, and mayors. Lexington Lodge No. 1 strives to create and deliver a heritage observance culture that is reminiscent of Freemasonry in the past. Alongside my good friends, Worshipful Brother Dan Kemble, past master of Ware Lodge of Research and recorder of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother Tom Nitschke, current master of Ware Lodge of Research and member of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother John Bizzack, past master of Lexington Lodge No. 1 and vice chairman of Rubicon. My name is Brian Evans. I'm the past and current master of Lexington Lodge No. 1. And humbly the chairman of the Rubicon Masonic Society. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. Let us begin. Worshipful Brother Tom, will you please do the honors to deliver the opening devotion this evening?
Brother, if you will join me in prayer. Grant our architect of the universe, remind us as we begin our meeting today of the purpose of Freemasonry. Show us that as fellow craft degree teaches us the importance of learning, knowledge, and education, that we must be about the business of spreading Masonic knowledge, that our fraternity, being better informed, may better reflect the best that is in Freemasonry. Guide us in this endeavor as we conduct all our business this day. We ask for your name's sake. Amen.
So mote be. Thank you, Worship Brother. Brothers, as you may know, the purpose of our Masonic Education series is to assist in the improvement of oneself by establishing a deeper understanding of Freemasonry with its traditions and practices, and further cementing the brotherhood of the fraternity for the betterment of mankind. Any opinions expressed during this virtual education this evening will be those of the presenter or the participant and do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. By participating with us this evening, you consent to our guidelines, which is our full disclosure and disclaimer can be found at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/disclaimer. As you know, these are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are welcome to attend and participate. So please be mindful that anything discussed this evening should be suitable for Masons of all degrees, as well as non-Masons. Gentlemanly manners are to be expected at all times. No discussion of politics or religion. No alcohol, no smoking, no food or foul language will be permitted. Attendees may be removed if not following this requested protocol. In an effort to best ensure that this virtual education series is as enjoyable as it possibly can be for everyone here, we recommend the following. Recommended attire for each meeting is coat and tie. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title or location under your video to identify yourself to other participants. If you're not a Mason, that's fine. Just please simply type guest after your name so we know. Please make sure you enable your video camera so we can see your pretty face. Please reduce any background noise and keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Please turn off all other computer programs and eliminate any other outside distractions in your environment. And finally, please always be patient should any technical difficulties occur, because sometimes they do in this day and age. Tonight's presenters are very good friends of mine. They're also members of the Rubicon Masonic Society, and I'll start with Worshipful Brother Dan Kemble. Worshipful Brother Kemble is a fifth-generation Freemason and a fourth-generation member of Hayes Lodge number 517 in Hayes, Kentucky. As a Mason for 42 years, he's a member and past master of the Ware Lodge of Research in Covington, Kentucky. He's also a member of Good Faith Lodge number 95. Worshipful Brother Kemble is an active member, very active member, and recorder of the Rubicon Masonic Society. He has served the Grand Lodge of Kentucky as District Deputy Grand Master, District number 18, Grand Pursuivant, member of the Committee on Bylaws, and as Chairman of the Committee on Masonic Education and Parliamentarian. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the William O. Ware Library in the Scottish Rite Valley of Covington. And Worshipful Brother Kemble resides in Covington with his lovely wife, Holly. Worshipful Brother Bizzack is a 45-year veteran in the field of policing and criminal justice. He served over half of his criminal justice career with the Lexington Police Department. He rose through the ranks, serving most of his career in the Criminal Investigation Bureau, Commander of Special Investigations, Robbery and Homicide, and later Commander of the Bureau itself. He retired in 1996 from assignment in the Office of the Chief of Police. He was appointed by 3 consecutive governors to the position of Commissioner of the Department of Criminal Justice Training in the Kentucky Justice Cabinet. He retired with 20 years of service as Commissioner of that department, where he directed the responsibilities of the department for the hiring and the selection practices of Kentucky police officers, as well as overseeing certified basic and advanced annual training for over 10,000 law enforcement and criminal justice officials. Dr. Bizzack is the author of 4 books and numerous essays, commentaries, and papers on leadership, criminal investigation, police standards, and the behavior and management of organizations. In addition, he's written 10 books and numerous essays and articles about Freemasonry. He speaks nationwide on a variety of issues about criminal justice system, critical thinking, and of course, Freemasonry. He's past master of the Lexington Lodge number 1, again, the oldest Masonic lodge in Kentucky. He's co-founder and coordinator of the Masonic History and Study Group and served 8 years as chair of the Lodge Education Committee and member of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky 2020 Committee on Education. He's a fellow and board member to the Masonic Society and the founding member of the Rubicon Masonic Society, where he serves as vice chairman. Dr. Bizzack is also a member of the Scottish Rite, the Philalethes Society, Southern California Lodge of Research, Texas Lodge of Research, and is a member and fellow of the William O. Ware Lodge of Research in Covington, Kentucky, Fiat Lux 1717, and Alba Lodge number 222 in Washington, D.C., an honorary member, the Sophia Lodge 767 in North Carolina. As you can see, we don't have much of a panel this evening for a good discussion, but I think we will do our best to pursue onward in any event. Tonight, we'll be having a very interesting conversation and discussion about a book that Worshipful Brother Kemble and Worshipful Brother Bizzack co-wrote together called A Candle in the Dark, 21st Century Conversations about Freemasonry. And I have a list about 3 pages long of questions that I would like to engage them with. But before doing so, a few more things I'd like to say, and I would like to give you an overview about this book. And then I will stop talking momentarily. Imagine that, Tom. In 21st Century Conversations about Freemasonry, A Candle in the Dark, our co-authors, John W. Bizzack and Dan M. Kemble, have used fictional series of virtual meetings such as this to identify and address how the Masonic fraternity has lost its sense of identity as an Enlightenment era institution. As contemporary society has moved away from Enlightenment era thinking and precepts, so too has Freemasonry. The imagined brothers use 21st century technology to stay connected while pinpointing their several concerns about the current state of the craft. Tracing a historical, albeit winding path from the age of enlightenment to the modern era, 2 separate strains of practicing Freemasonry begin to emerge from these discussions. One strain, referred to as the mainstream Masonic community, prefers a less intellectually rigorous approach and is essentially a community service club. The other strain, while much smaller, identified as heritage seekers, looks to reconnect the fraternity with its Enlightenment era roots. The discussion that unfolds in this book is the same discussion being held in Masonic groups across the United States at this very time in our lives. And it is a discussion that addresses the very essence of Freemasonry. And we will discuss this and hopefully continue its discussion tonight after some questions are asked and answered are given. So, Worshipful Brother Bizzack, would you like to start by reading a passage or two or further explaining what started this book in your mind and what drove you and Worshipful Brother Kemble to write this book for our craft?
Certainly, thank you, brother. I'll do that by reading a short passage from the book itself that is in the prologue. Ask yourself this question: when was the last time my lodge spent 2 hours discussing the historical aim and purpose of Freemasonry and contemplating the extent to which the aim and purpose is present in the craft's contemporary practices? In most instances, the time it took to read the question is more time than lodges generally invest in deliberating on the essence of Freemasonry. After all, there are minutes to read, bills to pay, etc., etc. But the pandemic gave Freemasonry the time to examine its history, its philosophy, and its purpose. And such examinations have indeed become part of the virtual communication mix. Thankfully, at least at the present, there seems to be no indication that such discussions will not continue among engaged and enlightened and now more technologically savvy brothers. This book is not entirely a fictional account of 19 men, all Masons, who through the use of modern communication technology were able to share with their brothers not only their understanding of the aim and purpose of Freemasonry, but their concerns, fears, and hopes of its future. The characters in this book engage in the kind of conversations that we ought to hear in Lodge, but do not. Beginning with the recognition that Freemasonry is an institution born in the age of enlightenment and bearing the best traits of that era, then tracing the drift of American society away from the Enlightenment era values. The men in this book took into account how institutional Freemasonry too drifted from the age of Enlightenment heritage and examined the reasons why. Once unmoored from its founding principles, American Freemasonry has struggled to adapt to an ever-changing American society. Through periods of great membership booms, followed by equally deep plunges in membership, American Freemasonry has lurched through flirtations with the temperance movement, adoption of rabid attachment to Americanism, donning the identity of community service club, and more recently has been content to take on the appearance of a moral canatonic. It recognizes its condition and its surroundings, but it's incapable of any meaningful response. At the moment, American culture takes little, if any, notice of our fraternity. The 19 chapters in this book do not reflect the typical 21st American Freemason. In the first place, these men are all engaged in the practice of Freemasonry, and that alone is enough to separate them from the overwhelming majority of contemporary American Masons. Further, they're outspoken in their belief that the mainstream of American Freemasonry is headed for a reckoning for which it's ill prepared. The reckoning will occur when membership levels and Grand Lodges and Grand Lodge endowments no longer generate sufficient revenues to maintain their current practices of the various grand jurisdictions present on the North American continent. While characters in this book are largely fictional, the ideas expressed in their conversations decidedly are not. These conversations have been going on for years in parking lots over coffee and telephone calls. The use of modern technology platform gives a wider audience to these conversations and demonstrate to both the participants and the listeners that there are more men than they may have realized who believe it is time for the institution of Freemasonry to engage in serious introspection. Freemasonry, as embodied in the ideals of the Enlightenment, encouraged men to engage in the free and open exchange of ideas. The 19 men in this work have claimed that bit of Enlightenment era heritage and have exchanged their views about the history, the purpose, and the perpetuity of Freemasonry. Your lodge, your jurisdiction are invited to join in this conversation.
Thank you, brother. So this is a very unique Masonic book. There's nothing else like out there like it that I'm aware of currently. So where did this idea for this book between you and Dan come from?
Well, we began writing the book around June of 2020 as the isolation that was imposed by the pandemic was starting to settle in. Virtual meetings were becoming more frequent, and Masons were starting to learn how to take advantage of the virtual platform. We'd already participated in several or part of creating some of these virtual programs by that time. And we wanted to advance some of the conversations that had already and continue to emerge from those programs around the country. But we wanted to do that in an informal setting and not one that was sponsored or coordinated by a lodge or appendant body or some Masonic event. Questions and discussions in the book, as I said in the prologue, are not brand new topics. These conversations have been occurring for some time, but not always in a lodge setting. So we decided to create the setting that brought together not only these like-minded men on these topics, but those with opposing views in a private setting, but a virtual one between brothers who knew each other from around the country. That created the 19 characters with different experiences, different backgrounds, an understanding of Freemasonry, and certainly different points of view. And some are in the book are current and past leaders in the fraternity, and there's even new initiates who feel who freely express their views, their concerns, they present their own facts, the facts that they've learned, and they did something that does not always occur in a lodge, and that's to talk about Freemasonry and the real issues that confront us now and well into the future.
Worshipful Brother Kemble, anything else you would add to basically an introduction to this book? Is there any particular theme or takeaway that readers should get? Why should they pick up this book?
I'll answer that question or try to answer it on two levels. There's a macro theme and something of a micro theme as well. The macro is Freemasonry is an Enlightenment era institution. It has the hallmarks of the Enlightenment era in its lessons and in its rituals, and that is the appreciation of reason and the appreciation of science. Our contemporary society has moved far away from Enlightenment era values. We appreciate science only when it tends to support our own position, and there's not a great deal of reason in the public square these days. So the macro question is there a place for Freemasonry, an Enlightenment era institution in a post-Enlightenment world? And that's one of the themes that we've tried to explore in this particular work. At the micro level, the much smaller level, all of these different conversations are issues that contemporary Freemasonry currently confronts. And it's the issues that we discuss in the book are by no means an exhaustive list. There are far more issues than the ones that we addressed, but these are ones that tend to commonly recur, and Freemasonry still has not fully come to grips with its internal issues that have led us to the point where we are today.
Interesting. Back to you, Worshipful Brother Bizzack. Throughout this book, you mentioned the term kaleidoscopic many times, referring Freemasonry. Now, I understand what a kaleidoscope is, but could you give your take on what you really mean by that as kaleidoscopic?
Well, kaleidoscopic is used as a description of the various patterns, practices, and the forms we find in American Freemasonry that some believe is really the beauty of the craft, and others see it as the reason the fraternity has become unmoored from its early historical intent and purpose as an educational and philosophical fraternity. Perhaps one of the best insightful analogies of what kaleidoscopic features do is found in a 1943 work by the Grand Secretary and Librarian of the Grand Lodge of Iowa, Charles Clyde Hunt. He uses an example of a baseball club to illustrate his point. And he writes that all rules, laws, and practices that are adopted by a baseball club must be consistent with the character as a baseball club. And that means that these laws, these rules, these practices and bylaws, et cetera, that are adopted by the baseball group is consistent with the character as a baseball club. If it's not, it would change the nature and it would no longer be recognized as a baseball club. Now, he notes too that such a club would no longer be a baseball club if it lacked the necessary characteristics of one. Therefore, a baseball club has that power to change its rules, its practices, its laws, and discard baseball and devote itself to, say, football. It can do that, but then it would cease being a baseball club. So in many ways, that kaleidoscopic approach that changes the character of Freemasonry through all the different practices and beliefs and interpretations does the very same thing.
Worshipful Brother Brian, if I may, I want to chime in on John's answer. And John and I have gone back and forth on this description many times, and it's one of our favorite topics. I shy away from the use of the term kaleidoscopic. As a child, I had a kaleidoscope, and it was one of my favorite toys. And my recollection is that when viewing the kaleidoscope, the patterns that you see are symmetrical. And I don't think you'll find much symmetry in contemporary American Freemasonry. It's a crazy quilt. It goes in all different directions, and there's not much rhyme or reason. But whether you call it a kaleidoscope or a crazy quilt, you come back, I think, to the central point, and that is, in my opinion, that most American Freemasonries really don't know what Freemasonry is. And as a result of that, you get all of these different definitions, and it has led us to a point where we frequently hear the phrase, my Freemasonry, or your Freemasonry, or Kentucky Freemasonry, or Indiana Freemasonry. And there is no my Freemasonry. There is no your Freemasonry. There's only Freemasonry. Freemasonry defines itself, and it defines itself through its ritual. And the individual Freemason doesn't have license to define Freemasonry because it's already been done for us. And one of our shortcomings that we've tried to address in this book is that we've failed to teach men as they come into Freemasonry what the aim and purpose of Freemasonry is.
So let's talk about the conversations that took place within this book. Worship Brother Kemble, and I'm curious to get your take on this too, Worship Brother Bizzack, is how did you come up with the conversations that took place within this book? Because it really is a dialogue read, back and forth discussion that gets inside these characters' heads about what is Freemasonry.
Well, it's a compilation of issues and conversations that either we've engaged in personally or have heard other people engage in. You don't have to be in Masonry for a long time to hear these types of conversations going on, although you seldom hear them in lodge. I mean, they are generally held in different forms, different formats. But it's essentially what Masons are talking about right now, I think.
Worship Brother Bizzack, and everyone else who is on this meeting, if you have questions that you would like to ask or thoughts that come up or comments to make, please jot them down or write them in the chat box, or I'll be happy to call on anyone in a little bit once we open the floor for discussion. Worship Brother Bizzack, so there's two strains, there's two groups identified in this book. I'm pretty sure I know what strain you guys are on. There's the mainstream Masonic community, and then there's the heritage seekers. How did you arrive at these terms of identifying these two groups, and what do they represent in your mind?
We were wanting to make a distinction between the larger membership community in American Freemasonry and the minority community, which, by the way, has always been around. It's not just a minority today. There was a minority group of Masons who did not see things the way the mainstream did, even in the 1780s, and certainly through the 90s and the turn of the century. we didn't want to use words that described or words like traditional or custom. We distinguished the two by using mainstream and heritage. And again, mainstream simply means how the majority of members generally view and practice and pursue Freemasonry. And heritage seekers are defined as those who pursue practices and experiences that are more in line with what they believe to be the earlier philosophical and educational institution that were the original blueprints of early Freemasonry.
I assume that all characters within this book are maybe inspired off of real life characters, perhaps, or people that you have come in contact with. Worship Brother Kemble, how did you guys come up with the characters that appear? 18, 19 characters, are there?
19 characters, and we tried to represent different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, so that we had a decent, what we felt like was a cross section of American Freemasons. As John mentioned when he read the part of the prologue, these are atypical in the sense that they're all engaged in Freemasonry, and of course we know that that by far the majority of American Freemasons don't really have that much of a relationship with Freemasonry. So they're atypical in a sense, but we have tried to again use the example of people that we've met, composites of people that we've met over the years. And the interesting thing, I think, for the reader of this particular book is that as you read through the characters, with whom do you identify? Do you see yourself in a character in the book, or do you see other people in any of the characters in the book? There's no deliberate intention to represent any one individual, but I think all of us at some point in time have met just about everybody who appears in this book.
There's one discussion topic for those of you that have not had a chance to read it. That is a very common topic of discussion in our fraternal organization, and it has to do with a character by the name of Josh. You describe Josh in the book as an entered apprentice Mason, and Josh expresses his frustration to other brothers about being unable to attend lodge meetings because his jurisdiction mandates that lodges conduct their business only on the Master Mason degree. So I assume there was some inspiration from real life there, but tell us about how that character evolved and maybe a bit about that discussion. Dan, John, whoever wants to take that.
Sure. Josh, as the dramatis persona in the front of the book, that gives a description of each character and what their background is and who they are before you begin to read the book. He is the newest and the youngest member of this group having these virtual meetings, and he did join because of his grandfather, who he greatly admired, who was a Mason. So he petitioned his grandfather's lodge, as he tells the others in the book, and was admitted. Now, he's enthusiastic about Freemasonry. It's infectious, his enthusiasm, and he's clearly engaged in his journey, and he wants more out of Freemasonry than he found in his lodge. And as you said, Brian, what makes him a truly interesting character is I'm confident that everybody in this room has met or knows somebody like Josh and has seen an experience like he described. But his character evolved in the book because his experience is so common and part of the larger conversation of issues in the book. So he talks about the night of his initiation, and he describes the catcalls, the interruptions, casualness of what was an important event to him, and how the evening turned out to be less than an impressive experience for him and quite a disappointment. After the ritual and lectures, he was instructed to leave the lodge so the business of the lodge could be conducted. So that tells us he's a member of one of 26 lodges in the United States, and the world for that matter, that continues to exclude entered apprentices and fellow craftsmen participating in their lodge until they become Master Masons. Now, he asks his grandfather why he was required to leave the lodge and couldn't attend meetings. And his grandfather told him that it's always been that way. always EAs and fellow crafts have been precluded from participating in meetings until they were raised. And that was something that he later learned was absolutely false. And that alone triggered him to question the knowledge, not only of his grandfather about the history of the fraternity, but to question part of what he was even being told about Freemasonry, about its lessons, its symbols, its instruction, and its interpretation. And as he learned more on his own, he learned the kaleidoscopic or crazy quilt, as Dan puts it, interpretations of Masonic principles and the varied practices. And it became clear to him that he would have to pretty much take this journey on his own unless he found like-minded brothers who were doing the same thing. And he expressed that that was one of the reasons he was so grateful to have been invited to participate in these kind of virtual meetings. He had nothing. He did make it clear in the book that he had nothing against Masons who wanted to be involved in service and civic club activities, but he wanted more. And in the end, he asked a question that kind of took the book in another direction on other topics. And the question he asked the group is, how is Freemasonry any benefit to a man who wants more than he's offered or finds in his own lodge? And that opened up a lot of deeper discussion for the remainder of the book.
So for our participants, I'm going to throw everyone a softball here because this is a topic I'd like to come back to, is the entered apprentice degree and the situation with Josh that we just witnessed here, the character Josh. Anyone that's a Kentucky Mason is aware that you have to be a master Mason to participate in lodge business. And I'd like to get a couple of participants and brothers' take on that, on how they felt perhaps the night that they were first initiated, or the protocols that we have to abide by within our jurisdiction, just for some additional conversation to that. Worship Brother Kemble, so you and John wrote this book. Are you guys characters within this book? Now tell us the truth. Why? And is anyone else?
We're all of the characters, and none of them at the same time, I hope. There is a character that I'm particularly, I guess, that I identify with somewhat, which will genuinely convince you that this is a work of fiction, because I identify with Scott, who's a theologian. And for those of you who know me, know that I'm far from that, although that's a personal interest of mine. But we use the character of Scott to tell a story that's a true story. And it came out of my home lodge. And in the book, we refer to it as the saddest story. And it's a story about a young man who joined the lodge, went through the degrees, turned in his proficiencies, was raised to the degree of Master Mason, and began to participate in the life of the lodge. And he had almost the perfect Masonic experience, in that it lasted about 2.5 years, which is almost exactly the average of the individual's Masonic journey. And at the end of that 2.5 years, he was suspended for non-payment of dues. And this is after he had been appointed to a couple of offices in the lodge. And before he was suspended, a member of the lodge, a friend of his, went to see him and said, "Why aren't you coming back? Why aren't you participating?" And his response was, "When I petitioned the lodge, you told me how much I would learn. And as I went through the degrees, you told me how much I would learn as a Mason. And I participated for a couple of years after being raised as a Master Mason, and I didn't learn a single thing that was useful to me in my daily life. So I decided that there was nothing in Freemasonry to continue to attract my membership." And in fact, he was eventually suspended for non-payment of dues. That's a true story. And I think that's one of the saddest stories that we have in Freemasonry. And unfortunately, it repeats itself over and over and over. So we use that story as a bridge to talk about what might happen if we had a structured education program where men really did learn things when they come into lodge, and not just when they come into lodge, but when they begin the process of wanting to be a member. A structured degree, a structured education program that begins even before the time a man submits a petition, and continues with an orientation program prior to initiation, and then continues between the degrees and after the Master Mason degree. And I think the point that we were trying to make in that is that the use of a structured program grounds a man in the aim and purpose of Freemasonry. And instead of creating a scenario where a man can say, I haven't learned anything, gives the man an ability to say, yeah, I've learned something as a result of becoming a Mason, and I'm continuing to learn.
I'd like to add something to that, Brian, if I may. Go back to your first question. Yes, Dan is one of the characters. He's modest, but he is one of the characters. But there's several men I see in this room tonight who are also part of the characters. And there's several men like Tom Jackson, Cameron Poe, and Barry Eastham, Gerald, several people in this room that we've talked to about many of the topics in this book, and that bleeds through. And as Dan said, if you read the book, you may recognize parts of yourself in these characters or people that you know. But I'd like to add that, as stated in the book, I believe we can all easily agree that Freemasonry is an idea. And when we try to restructure that idea just to save the name Freemasonry, and we neglect and forget to pay attention to the idea itself, it's no longer Freemasonry, even if we insist it is. Now, that was not a new idea that we had in the book. That came from Tom Jackson in a presentation he made a dozen years ago. And it still stands as true today as it did then. Freemasonry we carry into the future has to be structured on the idea of Freemasonry. And when that's not done, our center line kind of weaves in and out of the idea, and there's little continuity on or close to the line of what Freemasonry is intended to do that's preserved for future generations. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing, but our ritual that men can't glean from other fraternal and social organizations or groups. And if the idea of Freemasonry is not expressed enough throughout our ritual, it's not the fault of the idea, brothers. It's the fault of those who serve as the stewards of the idea, who don't adequately instruct, teach, or example Freemasonry in their lodge. And that can be remedied, as Dan said, by structured degree programs that ensure that there is consistent proficiencies, not just memory work, regurgitated memory. And that'll help us eventually divorce ourselves from that kaleidoscopic or crazy quilt approach to instructing new members, because the underlying assumption we've fallen into in this fraternity over the multiple decades is that a man, while he must be suitable for membership, is a man who's willing to also embark on a vigorous journey of self-improvement. Now, we've somehow come to define vigorous journey of self-improvement as men who accomplish that by merely being a member of the fraternity, and that's all there is to self-improvement. Just be a member. You don't have to involve, engage, participate. Just be a member. And when we see across the country that 56% of the men in our fraternity have not participated since receiving their last degree, I think that tells us that we have an issue to be addressed.
Yeah, just a thought. I would add to anybody maybe that is participating here or watching this at a later time who is a Mason. If you feel as though you're not getting what you feel you should be getting in Freemasonry, explore.
Yeah.
There are thousands of books out there, thousands of other lodges, other brothers. There are men that think and feel the same way you do. So engage in those conversations, just like we are tonight. I don't want to hog the mic the whole time. So just a few more real quick questions. And then, Right Worshipful Brother Tom Jackson, I'd like to come to you first when we go to the open floor and have you elaborate further on the idea of Freemasonry, if you don't mind, sir. Worshipful Brother Bizzack, how do you see this book ultimately being used by Masons to either initiate or to continue similar 21st century conversations about our fraternity?
That's an interesting question, Brian. This book is in essence a snapshot of topics and issues and controversies, problems, also successes and sensible discussions about the consequences of these multiple past decades that have allowed our fraternity and its members to think of and consider Freemasonry as anything they want it to be. Now, these are critical topics, and in some way they've been discussed since prior to the Civil War, but not always in lodges. That isolation imposed by the pandemic and that increased use of virtual technologies brought us more together in a way that allows these kind of discussions to be explored in more depth. And that certainly revealed that there's more members who seek to find out the answers to the question of how did American Freemasonry evolve into what it is today, and then employ that knowledge to work toward constructive improvements in the fraternity. Now, as you know, we've received a lot of emails since these virtual sessions have been produced by Lexington and Rubicon and William Ware over the last, or since May of 2020. I think it's 30 some episodes that we've produced. We know too that they're posted and they're viewed on YouTube to the tune of over 23,400 views since May of 2020. So over those 15 months, I think it kind of tells us there's men interested in Masonic education and the kind of discussions that we have and the gatherings that we coordinate on this platform. Now, of course, that didn't even begin to count the thousands who have attended and viewed other similar virtual meetings like this one that have taken place around the world. And I call to your attention and the group's attention to an email, a specific email we received, and we receive a lot of text and emails from brothers who attend these. He said he had never been exposed to the conversations and topics and discussions that he had seen on this series and other series over the 20 years that he's been an active Mason. Now that should tell us something, and that should cause us to ask why there has not been regular exposure to or discussions about such topics and issues in our lodges. So we hope this book is serving and will serve as a resource for those who seek more awareness and ideas of the labor that we have facing us today and ahead of us, and join in the conversations that are taking place around the country right now.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks. Worship Brother Kemble, a candle in the dark too?
We've certainly left that possibility open. The book ends with the 19 characters winding down one of their virtual evenings together, and they agree to meet again, and at their next meeting to invite other Masons to join with them who may not necessarily have the same opinions that they have. So the possibility certainly exists for a follow-up to that. But in many ways, this particular book wrote itself because the issues that are raised in that or in the book are issues that men are talking about. There are other issues out there that are being discussed, and that may give us the opportunity to come back and review those issues as well at a later time.
Great. And I know that you would like to just close with, before we open it up to the floor, by reading a brief passage from the book.
Very brief, and Don read a brief passage to open this discussion. I'd like to read a brief passage to bring it to a close, and that is, the conversations related in this book have not ended. In a certain sense, they've just begun. Are you interested in joining these conversations? Those who may disagree with the positions and comments in this writing are invited to write their rejoinder, in which they may attempt to refute the themes in this book. Hopefully, such an attempt will be grounded in and with informed opinion, not anecdotes or a mere repeat of popular narratives. Otherwise, such an effort would serve only as a mirror of that to which the membership has been exposed for too long. If evidence exists to refute the positions taken in the book, let that evidence be produced. Same standard applies to those who may be inclined to agree with the ideas and opinions expressed herein. If evidence to support the positions taken in this book exists, let it be produced. The age of enlightenment taught men to rely on reason and fact when determining their course for the future. Freemasonry, an institution born in that era, should do no less.
Brothers, we're going to open this up for discussion now, and a couple of thoughts that have come to my mind that I'd love to get feedback on is the discussion on the EA degree, maybe kind of what your experience was and how you felt before, during, or after that. Just a basic question of what is Freemasonry in your mind. I don't want to hear a recited version from a monitor. I want to hear something from the heart, what it really is and means to you, please. And a few others that we can touch on if we have time. So, Right Worship Brother Tom Jackson, you were mentioned in the discussion this evening about Freemasonry being an idea. Would you elaborate your thoughts on that, sir?
Brian, I think the paper that I referred to the issue on was one that I gave in, I think, the Texas Lodge of Research back maybe 20 years ago. And I referred it, I titled that paper at that time as, "What Are We Trying to Save?" And I emphasized that if we save the name Freemasonry and forget what we are, then it's no longer Freemasonry. I referred to it as an ideal. And to save the title or the name Freemasonry and forget the ideal, and John referred to it, I think, as an idea, and they could be interchangeable. If we save the name and forget the purpose, then we no longer have Freemasonry. One issue that came up in the book, and I heard it discussed tonight, was the requirement of many Grand Lodges in North America only permitting individuals to the Master Mason's degree to sit in on discussions and business of the lodge. In most of my travels that I've done, I found that we are in a minority with the rest of the Grand Lodges of the world. Almost all of them operate where it requires up to 3 years to complete the Master Mason's degree. And I can see a reason then it would be necessary for the individual brother to be able to sit in on the business of the lodge. In North America, and it's been a characteristic of North American Freemasonry, we generally require 3 months. And even that's changed in the last decade and a half, where we confer the degrees in less than 3 months. But if we look at it, we get our entered apprentice Mason's degree, then we wait 1 month to get our fellowcraft Mason's degree, and that is the first time that the brother cannot sit in on business of the lodge. Then you go 1 more month and you get your Master Mason's degree and you can sit in on the business of the lodge. So essentially, we're only going through 2 months that a new brother cannot sit in on the business of the lodge in North America. This isn't true in most of the Grand Lodges of the world. It takes years in many cases to get to 3rd degree. It's only been in recently, and when I say recently, the last 20 years, 30 years, when the World Conference began to expose the Grand Officers in North America to business outside of the Grand Lodges of North America, that they became aware of the fact that most Grand Lodges of the world permit their members to sit in from the time they're entered. And then they thought they discovered something new and it became a big issue. We should be doing the same thing. I don't have any opposition at all to a new made entered apprentice Mason sitting in on the business of the lodge. My only concern is the reason we feel that it has to be done. And as far as my entered apprentice Mason's degree, very frankly, when I received that degree, I was so impressed with what took place, so impressed with the fact that a man could stand there and recite to me what these men did. And I thought I could never do it. But I never considered the fact that And it never became an issue with me that I couldn't sit in on a business meeting until I got my third degree. It may be an issue with some brothers, but I never looked at it as a big concern of mine. I never even considered the fact that I couldn't sit in on it. I guess I hope I tried to clarify some of the points that I feel about the issue. Frankly, I did read The Candle in the Dark. John sent me a copy when it was first published. I thought it was a great book. One of the better ones on Freemasonry today, one that needs to be read by every Freemason. Brian, I thank you for the opportunity to sit in on these programs. I congratulate you again on the remarkable job that your three entities are producing here. Thank you much.
No, thank you. And the pleasure is all ours. We love seeing you. Hope you're feeling well. Brother Cricket, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you can handle it. You have big, broad shoulders. You were just raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason. You were not able to sit in lodge business for quite some time, maybe 2 years, how long it took, maybe approximately. What are your thoughts not being able to sit in and now being able to sit in? And I know that you've not sat in officially in any business yet because you are that fresh, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
Good evening, brothers. Any, I guess, apprehension or any feeling of being upset of not being able to sit in lodge was quickly put to ease. Or I don't know quickly, but it went away pretty quick when I started really getting into the education, the formal education of my instructors, because I really started, although the business of lodge is important, I got to learn, and I'm still learning what's really important about Freemasonry. And so that's sort of how my mind, it was like, hey man, I should be able to be in sitting lodge, full lodge. But after like I said, after I got into education and to learn the ritual work for a while, I started understanding the importance of what Freemasonry was, and not as much about meeting minutes and paying the bills, which again are important. But what was important to me was getting to learn what it means to be a Freemason, to learn the history of Freemasonry. And so that's sort of, that was my mindset as it sort of evolved, and it evolved over a quick time. And although it sort of did take a while to become a Master Mason and get raised, I consider it a blessing. I consider it a blessing that I found Lexington Lodge 1, and then another blessing was that it took time. It at the time it seemed like a bummer, like, hey, but it really turned out to be a blessing because I really got to learn. I got to spend more time with, my fellow brothers who I was getting past and raised with. So, and yeah, that's it. So
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother, very much. We're happy to have you. Brothers, we're not making any constitutional changes here this evening. I'm sure there's men on this meeting that feel that entered apprentice fellow crafts should not sit in on lodge business. I'm sure there are some that think that they should sit in on lodge business. The purpose of this is to just have a mature conversation and address and hear both sides. And then, maybe one side plants a seed in the other and vice versa. So I will say that for those of you that might be interested in getting your entered apprentice and fellow crafts more involved sooner, at Lexington Lodge No. 1, a pattern was kind of established where at our lodge where we take our lodge to ease. After we conduct a majority of lodge business, we take our lodge to ease for education. And we bring our entered apprentice and fellow crafts into lodge. and they participate in education. And we have an educational discussion about Freemasonry while the lodge is at ease. So they'll sit around about a half hour or so before that time comes when we can do that. And then they will engage in a little bit of music and further discussion. And then we ask them to leave and we bring the lodge back to labor. So that's a very unique thing that I think that we have done. And I don't know exactly when that started. Maybe Worship Brother Poe or Worship Brother Bizzack, you can enlighten us with that. But that is a very unique strategy, so to speak, and it works very well. And I think it's something that can engage younger brothers sooner and feel as though they're a part of the lodge. John Cameron, you want to mention anything else about that?
The going to ease started about 2016. The need to do that started when Cameron was master. Toward the end of his time in the East, he was able to kickstart Masonic education in a structured direction. And that later led to opening and closing the lodge, but in the middle of it, going to ease so that we could invite in the fellow crafts and entered apprentices for education and make them feel more a part of the lodge.
Mm-hmm. Worship Brother Pro, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would agree with what he said. The reason it came about was because I wanted to include everyone as much as possible in what we were doing, just to keep everybody in the loop, so to speak. I didn't like the idea of making them wait in the dining hall for things to happen and wonder what's happening and things like that. So, going to refreshment to do education, I mean, I was called a lot of nasty names in some back rooms about that because they said, well, you can't do that. And I said, why not? And they couldn't find anything in our Constitution to prevent it. So we continued doing it today. So.
Sure. Is there anyone on this evening that feels as though the entered apprentice and fellow crafts should not participate in lodge business that would feel comfortable giving their thoughts on that topic? If so, you can unmute yourself and begin.
Worshipful Brother Brian, that's a topic that I would love to hear somebody express an opinion on if there's anyone who feels that way. But while they're thinking about their answer, there's another element to this I'd like to discuss, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That's this. It's really not about transacting business. I mean, that's the lesser of the issues. When we open and close lodge on the Master Mason degree, we go through an opening ceremony, and there's a question and answer that's a part of that ceremony, and that I think helps in some ways, has caused us to think about Freemasonry in a specific way. The question is, what induced you to become a Master Mason? And we all know the answer to that. In the entered apprentice degree, there's also a question that's asked in the opening ceremony, and that question is, what came you here to do? And of course, we know what the answer to that question is. So from my perspective, having sat in lodge for 40 plus years, I very seldom hear lodges address the question, what came you here to do? What did you come here to do? In some of my opening remarks, I mentioned that Freemasons don't know what Freemasonry is. We don't know why we're here. We don't know what we came here to do. I think if more lodges were opening on the entered apprentice degree more frequently, we would have a regular reminder of what our purpose is, and we might be able to better define what it is that we came here to do. We'd be reminded of that. And I think we've lost that in not opening and transacting our business on the entered apprentice degree. It's not about the transaction of business. It's what you hear in that opening and closing ceremony that helps to define what it is that we came here to do.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's, well, you couldn't have said it better. Worship Brother Barry Eastham, I'd like to get your input on something, and then Worship Brother Gerald Smith, I want to go to you based on your comment as well. Worship Brother Barry, hopefully you have your mic available.
Yep.
Great. So you and your brother Todd spoke about this subject today, you just said, And you mentioned that legislation will likely be put forth again this year. Just for some context, could you just explain what you mean by legislation being put forth and how frequently that has taken place? And then some of the conversations about this topic that you feel is reasonable?
Several years ago, Greenup, we thought we were the first ones to bring this up, but we found out that we were not. I can't remember how many years before somebody else had tried to bring this legislation before Grand Lodge, but our Constitution says that all business shall be conducted in the Master Mason degree, and we simply wanted to do away with that. And if it's really easy to find the genesis of this practice that we have going back to the Baltimore Convention of the 1840s, which as much as we could gather and what we read in the history books was a result of more, and obviously all the stories of imposters trying to gain admittance to lodges. And so a bunch of Grand Lodges got together in Baltimore and 18 tickety 2. I've forgotten the dates. I really can't remember the exact year. And we had a few things that came out of this that several Grand Lodges adopted. The usage of dues cards, for example, and doing business on the entered apprentice degree. And this has gotten brought up with varying degrees of success in Kentucky over the last few years. I remember we were there one year. I was thinking it got laid over, and I thought, the crowd just really seemed to be receptive to the idea. But then the next year, when it was going to be voted on, it just flopped. It was just awful. It was like a completely different body was meeting. But the legislation to change that has been brought up several times, so much so that a couple of years ago, a lodge, and why you would want to do this, I don't know. I guess that's my opinion. I need to leave that out of here. A lodge brought up a piece of legislation that if legislation failed, you wouldn't be able to bring it up again for 5 years, basically because they just got tired of hearing it. And the entered apprentice legislation is exactly what they were talking about. And it was, I just wanted to, I could have chewed nails that day. I was so furious that it even came up. But I mean, it's not just been Greenup. Like I said, there's been several lodges. Did Lexington put forth legislation before, Brian?
I think it was, no, was it? I don't believe it was our lodge. I think it was.
I know we've not been the only ones. There have been others. And like I said, we first time we did it, we thought we were being really bright and witty and innovative in doing it. But, as it turns out, we weren't. We were absolutely not the first ones to try that. And, like I said, the frustrating thing is it always seemed like it would gain a little bit of traction every year. And then it just kind of fell away. But that was always was one of the things. And like I was telling you in the chat there a minute ago, as coincidence would have it, my brother and I were just discussing this very subject today, and he's I don't know if I should say this in a public forum. He was like, well, maybe we ought to try this again. I was like, yeah, I'm always down for it. I like a good fight.
Sure. Dan, it wasn't William Ware that presented the legislation, was it?
No, it's in the last several years, it's come up a couple of different times. The year to which Brother Barry was referring, when it was laid over, there were a number of lodges in Northern Kentucky that co-sponsored it, and Lexington 1 was a co-sponsor. Richmond 25 was a co-sponsor. Paintsville 381. We had a number of lodges that co-sponsored that. And then 2 or 3 years after that, a couple of lodges in Northern Kentucky again, DeMoss 220 and Crittenden Dry Ridge sponsored it. So it's come up a couple of different times with different co-sponsors, but essentially the same legislation.
Okay. Worship Brother Gerald, you have some comments as to why it's actually a good thing in your mind?
Yeah, I do, Worshipful Brian. I happen to have the good fortune to be in a lodge that does all of the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of we talk to a candidate for or a prospect for 6 months before he's ever given a petition. He knows it's going to take a couple of years to go through the degrees. There's a series of classes that they have to take and so on. But the topic that we're talking about right now, about having fellow crafts, entered apprentices, be able to participate in the meeting, and fellow crafts for that matter as well, is if you're being limited to being in the third degree. The business meeting has nothing to do with the degrees, and with the only thing about it being conducted in the third degree are two things: is which ritual do you see in the opening, and the fact that you are excluding everybody except Master Masons. Well, in California, we changed that a long time ago, and it's been particularly for the kind of lodge that I'm describing that South Pasadena is. We have, as soon as somebody has gotten that first degree, that is the initiatory degree, they have been initiated, they are entitled to call themselves brother and one another brother. They're entitled to wear their apron. They need to start participating right away. And one of the reasons why people get bored, and you were talking about how many people take their 3 degrees and you never see them again. There are a lot of people that take only 2 degrees or only 1 degree, and you don't see them anymore. And if they're not being able to come to any meetings, they can go on for weeks or months or however long it is that they're not participating. Our guys are coming in, and in classes, we wait till we have a group of 5 to 8 and they take the degrees right in a row. They take the classes as a group. They bond as a group. They come to, as they each get in their initiatory degree, and we're going through this right now. We have 3 of 7 that have gotten the degrees. They then are getting to participate. This is encouraging the 4 that are waiting to get the degree. And once they get in there, they all sit together in the northeast corner of the lodge as long as they're entered apprentice degree. They don't get to vote. You have to be a Master Mason to vote. But they get to see the ritual of the degree that they've had. They get to see it regularly. It gets soaked into them while they're preparing to go forward to the next degree. And that goes on all along. One of the biggest mistakes we make, and this thing about retaining our membership, is having this long cocoon that they're in where they can't join the group and they can't see the group functioning. This also keeps them informed on what the decisions are that are being made in the group. What are the plans that are going to be going on? They're up every time we have an event. Those are service opportunities for the guys that are going through the degrees. For the prospects, as far as that's concerned, certainly you can't let them in. But once a guy has got a degree, having the practice of every month showing up, wearing a suit, putting on his apron, going into the lodge, seeing the opening ceremony, watching his brothers do the lodge of the business, being informed, being there with his brothers that he's going through. Mm-hmm. That's the bonding time for these guys, so that when they come to a Master Mason, they don't come and see their first business meeting after they're a Master Mason and they've been in one of these speedball lodges. They've been a Mason for a month or two, or a lodge like ours when they have for a year or two. They know how the lodge works at that point, and they've had that experience. The experience alone of being able to come regularly and attend, be included, rest the part, watch the ritual. That's a very important gestation for Masons, and I highly recommend it. I feel like you guys are taking on the idea of the continuing education with one hand tied behind your back when you can't have your guys that have received a degree come in and see Masonry in their lodge in action from that first moment on when they're called brother and given a name.
Thank you, Worship Brother. I appreciate your comments very much. I see both sides. And, perhaps the right answer is just let it be a lodge decision, at the individual lodge basis. But Brother Cricker, do you have perhaps an opposite perspective? Let's hear it.
Thank you again, Worshipful Brother. So I probably won't put this as elegantly as Brother Jarrell. So the way I look at it is, so you have brothers, you become a brother after you're an entered apprentice. So you still have to earn the right, to me, to sit in lodge. And sure, it stinks to come to dinner and hang out there while the business is being conducted, and then the lodge goes to ease. But it's really cool when the lodge goes to ease because you do get to come in. So I think that builds a bit of character, builds a bit of endurance in the entered apprentice or the fellow craft Mason, so that they're going to keep, this is who you want to be in lodge, is somebody who is keeping to come back or keeps coming back even when it's tough and when it's a little bit harder, and I don't know if I'm conveying my thought very well, but I'm also sort of a traditionalist, and I know the tradition before the Baltimore convention or whatever it was, so it was always open under an entered apprentice. But what about to the point, I want to see lodge open on the Master Mason degree. Now that I've made it there, I want it to always see it be open on the Master Mason degree. So to me, it's like you need to earn it. So you need to sort of be set to the wings for a little while. You need to learn. You need to go through you need to learn and sort of go through the hardship, if you want to call it a hardship.
Prove yourself. Prove that you're committed throughout.
Yeah,
the
there we go. Prove you're committed to the task at hand, that you really want to be a Master Mason, that you really want to belong to this group of guys or group of men. And always after dinner, there's always got a little cleanup that needs to happen. And what you can do is you can help out your brothers by cleaning up a little bit. It's not hard, take out the garbage, clean off some plates. That's about it. But it's just, and also you get to bond with your brother entered apprentice Masons or your brother fellow craft Masons. So so if I'm getting to vote someday, I'd vote to keep it only lodge can do business on the Master Mason degree.
Good deal. We appreciate that opinion for sure.
I'll quit talking for the rest of the night.
Let's circle this back to our authors this evening, Dan and John. Worship Brother Bizzack, do you have any comments you'd like to make based on any conversations so far?
Well, certainly one on a comment that you made just a minute ago. Of the 24 jurisdictions in the United States that have allowed since 1998 entered apprentices to be involved in the lodge, there's a variety of ways they've done that. They don't vote, and they're allowed in a variety of certain circumstances. Every jurisdiction had attached rules, but they totally rejected the Baltimore Convention concept that they should be excluded. But you mentioned a minute ago that perhaps it should be left up to lodges. The last time this was presented in this jurisdiction, it was crafted to be just that. And Dan Kemble is the one who crafted that legislation to allow it to be the decision of each individual lodge. It still failed. Majority did not want any lodge making a decision other than what has been in effect in this jurisdiction since 1855. over 12 years after Baltimore Convention recommended this change. So it's embedded and it's in the culture, and the majority, which we refer to as the mainstream Masonic community, certainly doesn't want it to change, even if it might be in the best interest of other lodges who see the value of doing that.
Mhm. Worship Brother Kemble, anything you want to add to that topic before we maybe kind of close this chapter and move on to the next one?
Well, as Right Worshipful Brother Jackson pointed out, this is an American issue. It's a response to the Morgan affair. Freemasonry was not intended, practiced or opened on anything other than the entered apprentice degree, and that's what you'll find throughout the rest of the world. And if there was ever any justification for limiting the participation of entered apprentices and fellow crafts in lodge business, that time is long since passed. My personal preference would be that we opened our lodges on the entered apprentice degree, but I also think that I could support leaving it to the discretion of the individual lodge as well as to what best fits their practices.
Yeah. Worship Brother Kevin Schneider, you had some comments you would like to make or questions for our authors this evening?
Yeah, I'd like to, the previous topic having been dealt with on several occasions in these types of venues, I'd like to return us back to more of the topic at hand, please. Based on at least my readings of history, it's pretty clear that, say, during the Age of Enlightenment, right, the vast number of men were basically trying to stay alive or exist, fight, feed their families. They were neither enlightened nor were they in pursuit of enlightenment, right? It's a very, very small percentage of men typically who were. In your research and preparing for this book, have you come across any evidence that there was any higher percentage of lodges in, say, the 17th century, around the 1700s, that were doing what you all described as heritage Freemasonry back in those days? Or was it roughly potentially the same percentage of lodges just getting together, meeting socially, drinking in the taverns as we have today? Maybe this is our heritage. Be curious what you found evidentiarily that might address that question. And depending on how long that answer takes, I do have one more at some point. Worshipful Brother Ryan.
Yes, thank you. John, you want to go first?
Well, the heritage seekers that we refer to are people who are seeking something that is as close to early Freemasonry as possible. Now, there's not a lot of records that tell us precisely what early Freemasonry was in every single detail, but we know that it was educational and philosophical with intent. So if we start at that point, we recognize that since the late 1788 period, there was a group of Masons who sought to return to earlier Freemasonry. And Freemasonry had only been in this country since the 1730s. So that tells us that there was something before there were so many, again, I'll use the word kaleidoscopic interpretations of what Freemasonry was. And I don't believe anybody can find precisely what it was every lodge did, even in the late 1700s and early 1800s. But we know collectively from writings of men who began to write more about Masonry in the 1830s through the end of that century, that it certainly wasn't exactly what was going on when it was first created.
Worship Brother Kemble.
Well, I think the question touches, and maybe unintentionally, on an important topic, and that is, we know that at the founding of the Premier Grand Lodge in 1717, there's a lot of overlap between the membership of those early lodges and the lodges that grew out of that, and the Royal Academy of Science. So men of science and men of letters and men of reason were attracted to Freemasonry, and they were attracted because of its philosophy and because of its emphasis on reason. That's all reflected in our ritual. I think the thing to think about here, though, is that one of the things that illustrates, or maybe the thing that illustrates, is Freemasonry was never intended for the masses. And one of our problems in the United States is that we have thrown the doors open to everybody, and we have a craft that by and large can't appreciate the concepts of the Enlightenment era. They just don't have the intellectual capacity to do that. Freemasonry has never been for people who just want to be a member of something. It's for men who have a specific desire, and that desire is to explore its philosophies and its lessons. Our problem is we've opened it to everybody, and we've let in people who don't have any desire or intention to engage in a philosophical pursuit. But I think that the attraction of Freemasonry in the Enlightenment era was its foundation in philosophy and in reason. I think that but for that, it would have never spread as rapidly as it did, and probably would never have spread to the European continent. Those are, I think, irrevocably intertwined with each other. And unfortunately, particularly when it came to the United States, we began to look at it as an organization just for anybody.
Yeah. So, brothers, the hours is getting long. I put a question in the chat box. I'd like for you to maybe just give a quick thought to that question, and if you want to share that in the chat box, or we can kind of just address those out loud in a moment. But before we do, Worship Brother Snyder, you said you had a follow-up question. You want to go with that?
Yeah, if you don't think it'll take too long here, I'll toss it out. And if you think it'll run us down a rat hole, you can feel free to terminate the discussion. So earlier it was mentioned that the purpose of Freemasonry, somebody mentioned it, I forget which of the two authors, was to help a man improve himself, become more enlightened, something to those words, right? What specifically in Masonic education programs do you think lodges should be focusing on to help inspire a man to improve himself, and in what directions?
Worship Brother Kemble, you want to go first on that one?
I think the best place to start is with the working tools of the degrees. A thorough and consistent explanation of how you can apply those working tools and their lessons to your individual life. Obviously, men come from different backgrounds, and they come from different experiences, and they have different abilities. So nobody is going to apply those working tools in precisely the same way, but yet the lessons of the working tools are the same for everybody. So I think that's the place to start. And as you start there and begin to work through that particular lesson, it's going to require a great deal of introspection by the man who is walking through the degrees or who's moving through the degrees. And just as it requires a great deal of introspection for those of us who have completed all the degrees. One of the things that we teach, and one of our favorite mottos, is know thyself. And that, I think, may be where we come back to in every single thing that we do in terms of Masonic education. How does this help me know me? And how does it help me identify the things in my life where I need to improve, the things in my life that I need to eliminate from my life, and what it is that stands between me and the man that I want to be?
Yeah, great answer. Worship Brother Bizzack.
I wholeheartedly agree with Worshipful Brother Dan.
Yeah. Good deal. So, brothers, in the chat box, I mentioned a question. In one sentence, how would you define your personal interpretation of Freemasonry? And not something that's defined in text, but something that maybe comes from your heart, or what it means to you. Anybody that would like to share that openly? I'll go first then, since we're all jumping at it, and I'll start calling on people next. And Edwin, you're first, because I see you chuckling over there. I can see you. The first thing that I would say, to maybe kind of piggyback off of Kevin's question, is I want to be around brothers. brothers that I can trust, brothers where you have, that you really have that brotherly love with another man. And I think that that's a special bond that is very difficult to create and find. And then as far as Freemasonry as a whole, to me, in its simplest form, it's a practice. You got to practice this stuff. And practice takes many, countless forms. And I've always said, the easiest practice is, can they show up on time, well-dressed, well-rehearsed to be a good brother? And to me, I think it can be the simplest of forms is what Freemasonry is to me. I think collectively together, we probably all agree that we know a fraction of what Freemasonry is. And we should humbly be okay with that because it's a never-ending journey. And I think these conversations, which is the purpose of this discussion tonight about the book, is having conversations about Freemasonry together so we can enlighten each other based on our own life experiences and enjoyments of the craft. So for me, it's a practice, and I want to practice around other brothers and other men who I know, like, and trust. All right, Edwin, you didn't sign off, did you? There you are, Brother Edwin. Let's hear what you have.
Okay, good evening, brothers. I'm gonna basically a lot of what I have to say is going to kind of sound about like you, Worshipful Brother Brian. The teachings of the fraternity, if applied to your life, will definitely help you. It's not something that you can just, you're going to have to apply yourself to it. You will have to try this. The brothers that I've found in the fraternity and the ones that I've come close to, and there's others that are also I hope to come even closer to, I consider them true friends, and I actually do consider them brothers. That means a lot to me. I've had several good conversations with brothers in the fraternity, and I've had brothers in the fraternity who have helped me out on big life decisions, just because I trusted their expertise and listened to that and listened to what their advice and what they had to say. That's, without rambling, that's about all I got.
Yeah, it's actually a tougher question than it appears to be when you really think about it. Worship Brother Tom Nitsky, what are your thoughts? In one sentence.
Like you, brethren, it is like Brother Edwin said, it's a very hard question to sometimes to answer, but I guess for me, it's the challenge and the introspection of finding who you really are. And because a lot of times, sometimes we like what we find, sometimes we don't like what we find. And I think trying to find yourself and who you truly are and fixing what you can and understanding what your limitations are. But I think in a greater sense is trying to understand the beauty of our Creator. And I think that's such a, there's so many things out there that I think we miss through time and through all the things that is out there that we can, there's a plan. And I think just trying to spend a lifetime of understanding that, or trying to get somewhat close to understanding it, I think it's an endeavor. I think that for me is a challenge, but it's something that I want to know. And I think if I can do that along with my brothers that have similar ideas, and we can do it together, it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you, Worship Brother. Brother Edwin, that was a way better answer than both of ours. That was probably perfect. So Worship Brother Tom, thank you. Any other thoughts on that? Any other interpretations, feelings, comments on that simple yet difficult question? Worship Brother Casessa, does your mic work?
Yeah, man.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Can we mute him?
Can we
I do
mute him?
actually have a comment. A few years ago, during the Grand Junior Warden, when they were interviewing the different Grand Junior Wardens, I brought up a question to all of them. Freemasonry as an institution, the Grand Lodge of Kentucky specifically, does not have a mission statement. They try to run it like a business, and we do not have a written down mission statement. What I'm getting at is we should be able to answer that question relatively easily if you ask a Freemason. I came up with an answer. This was years ago, and I can't remember exactly the verbiage I used. It was actually pretty good, if I do say so myself, but it was something like Freemasonry is a philosophy where a man is constantly seeking self-improvement, and the institution of Freemasonry uses allegory and ritual to help hone man's introspective self-improvement, thereby better enabling him to offer assistance to other men for self-improvement. It's something along those lines. But as I've gotten more active in Freemasonry, it's so much more than just the personal level, man. A big part of it is the fraternal aspect. Dan Kemble and I, and actually Tom Nitschke and I hang out all the time, and Edwin, and I mean, we have become extremely close. I mean, these are guys I would have never, ever crossed paths with had I not joined this fraternity. And I mean, it's like you know those guys, Brian, you too. It's golden. I mean, we would have never met each other, and we have so much fun. I think that there's so much more than even the surface. Freemasonry on the surface is a philosophy that basically you follow to better improve your life. But man, I think it's almost discounting it, the experience at least. Yeah. You know, it just does bother me though, as an organization, the institutional Freemasonry really needs to maybe talk about what our mission is, and that maybe will limit the guys that think that we're a pancake, the weights that we have around our the guys that are dragging us down a little bit.
Right. I think you found something when you really enjoy attending and participating and being around the other men there with you. That's when you found something special. And I have one more question for you, Worship Brother Cassessa. Is that a purple suit in that picture?
It was a mob. It was my zoot suit I wore to a mob party with my wife.
Well, Halloween's right around the corner.
My camera doesn't seem to be working. I got a new computer. I haven't hooked it up yet, so we'll figure it out.
We prefer your picture.
Worshipful Brother Brian.
Yes.
This is John Louderback, past Master St. John's Lodge No. 9 in Seattle.
Hello.
What comes to my mind is the Sanskrit word namaste, which means oneness of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave you with that, sir. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you for your comment and participating, Worship Brother. Appreciate it very much.
Worshipful Brother Brian, if
Yes.
I may.
Sure.
One thing that it's always been said, if you surround yourself with greatness, if you want to build yourself up, surround yourself with greatness. Or there's variations. That's not exactly how it goes, but I can't think of the exact saying. And in my mind, that's what I'm doing here with brothers in the fraternity. There are certain brothers that I surround myself with, and they in turn will call me out when I need to be called out, and also lift me up and make me strive to raise my standards to rise up to, and not the standards be brought down to me.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
Brethren.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ken Davis from Lexington, then Indianapolis, then now retired in Albuquerque. And I can answer what does Freemasonry do for me in kind of a personal way. I was I became a Mason in Indianapolis at a European concept lodge called Lodge Vitruvian. And when we were getting ready, my wife and I, to move to Albuquerque after my retirement from Indiana University, we were going to come out here and kind of look at neighborhoods. And so I found there was a Yahoo group for New Mexico Masons on the web. So I went on the Yahoo group one evening and said, I'm going to be in Albuquerque in 2 weeks for about a week, and I'd love to visit any meetings that you're having during that week. And by morning, I had 24 responses, 24 different brothers. And my wife said, wow, she said, they don't know you. And I said, yes, they do. They know me. They know the kind of man I am. And I say that with some humility, but not a lot. And what I found here, we're a very multicultural state. And so I'm in a lodge with Hispanics and Indians and Anglos like me. And again, they're people I never would have met, whose cultures I never would have known this intimately were it not for Freemasonry. One other thing I'd say about who can sit in a lodge, when we have a meeting to initiate a brother into his entered apprentice degree, he immediately sits down at the end of the degree and we close the lodge. And as with all of you in your lodges, it's a rather impressive ceremony to close a lodge in full. And for me, that clinches the deal. They see what many of them came to Masonry for, was that sense of heritage, that sense of dignity, that sense of pride of work. And so for me, it's very important to have those new EAs be able to see a closing immediately, and then at the next lodge meeting, see an opening, and continue through, and perhaps very soon see another man go through that EA degree. So thanks for this evening. This has been a great program and a great conversation.
Thank you. We very much appreciate your comments and your participation this evening, brother. Thank you. So, brothers, we're going to just circle this to a close here. I think my main takeaway after hearing you with your comments, Kenneth, is, we can all have different opinions, perspectives, and views on what to do and when to do it and how to do it and et cetera. But we need to make sure we always come together maturely as men and Freemasons to put those differences aside and remember that we are still brothers and we should act like it, both inside and outside. And I think that's important. And I think that's what the Candle in the Dark was really all about, is discussing the two different strains of Freemasonry, but in the end coming together because we are a fraternity of men, of brothers. So, Worship Brother Dan and Worship Brother Bizzack, any other final comments you'd like to make about the book or any other comments this evening?
Worshipful Brother Brian, I've got two, if you don't mind. In the last few minutes, our conversation has really sort of been about the issue of bonding through Freemasonry. And we attempt to address that somewhat in Candle. The 19 characters in that book share fraternal bonds. And as you read through the book, you can kind of find that some of those brothers have bonded on a very personal level. We've heard comments tonight about men who in Masonry have bonded. And I want to explore just very briefly one element of bonding, and that's this. Personal improvement is not invisible. When we see a man come into Masonry and practice the lessons of Freemasonry and begin to improve his life, that's apparent to us in many ways. And that ability to see another man improve himself in Masonry serves as an inspiration to the rest of us. After 40 years, I'm still inspired by people that I see come into Masonry and practice the lessons of Freemasonry and improve themselves. And it makes me want to continue maybe continue, maybe begin to improve myself as well. So I think one of the things that bonds us together is that we serve as an inspiration to each other. And I think that's one of the real core strengths of Freemasonry, is that we inspire each other to be a better version of ourselves. So that's my first thought. And the second thought that I have is that I'll just share with you, I have been very blessed over the 4 decades that I've been a Freemason to have come into contact with many men who have in different ways inspired me. And I want to publicly thank Worshipful Brother Bizzack for inviting me to participate in the authorship of this book with him. He's a legitimate Masonic scholar. I'm just a guy. And for him to ask me to participate in this with him has been a great honor. It was a great pleasure. And Worshipful Brother John, thank you for your inspiration.
Worship Brother Bizzack, would you like to respond and offer your final comments on the book tonight? Did we lose you?
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your comments very much. And Brian, thank you for the time and the work that you put in to moderate and coordinate not just tonight's episode, but the previous 32, I believe, is the correct count. And I want to thank all the brothers in attendance tonight. And I continue to encourage each of you to continue to join in the conversation about our craft, no matter what your point of view is. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I've been a Mason for 15 years. I'm a member of Nova Ciceria Harmony number 2 in Miamitown, Ohio. If I'd have met you guys when I first came in here, I'd have been a whole lot further along. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. That means a lot, and we appreciate your willingness to share that very much.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Worshipful Brother Kemble, where can we obtain your book?
It's available on Amazon.com.
Thank you.
It's also available on John's website, which is thecraftsman.org.
Craftsman.org.
Craftsman.org. Yeah. And, you know, I think it's important to say that we have presenters on here that are authors. But the purpose of this is to engage in discussions about their book. And if that book opens the door for further discussions and makes us think a little bit deeper about Freemasonry, then it's done its job. So we appreciate John and Dan for your hard work in this book. And I just hope that I wasn't the butt of any jokes as you were writing the comments and the script and the commentary. Don't tell me if I was. Brothers, next month's presenter is the most worshipful brother, Michael J. Stoops, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Kansas. Very good man, good friend. He will be presenting on Monday, October 25th at 7 p.m. and we'll have a good discussion with him indeed. He is the most worshipful Grand Master of Grand Lodge of Kansas. He believes that the Grand Lodge, in his mind, and I am actually quoting this from him, he believes that the Grand Lodge does not exist for the purpose of promoting the Grand Lodge or its officers. He believes that its purpose is to provide structure and support to its constituent lodges and through them, its communities. So you will hear a very interesting and unique perspective from this Grand Master here at our next presentation. We look forward to hosting him and hearing what he has to say about our craft. The instructions for joining that meeting will be sent out to everyone the Monday morning of this meeting who is with us tonight and who's previously RSVP'd. For those of you that might be finding this video after the fact, you can RSVP anytime at rubiconmasonica.com/RSVP. And just briefly, if there's any final announcements or comments on behalf of William O. Ware, Rubicon, or Lexington Lodge No. 1, we could share those at this time. Worship Brother Tom, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
Just a couple things there. Just to say to Brother Dan and Brother John, excellent book, excellent discussion tonight. And as I said recently in a lodge after a presentation, it makes you realize how lucky we are to be in one of the greatest fraternities in the world, and how lucky I am to know many of you. And it's such a great feeling. But regards to Ware Lodge of Research, we do have our stated meeting this Wednesday. If you're in the area of Covington, Kentucky, we're going to have Dave Hosler, Saving Fraternal History. He's going to give a presentation on that. And on November 12th, if you're also in the Northern Kentucky area, I do have a limited amount of tickets still left. November 12th, we're going to have an evening with Brother Andrew Hammer out of DC. So that's going to be a really fine event. Looking forward to that. So if you're interested, please get a hold of me. But other than that, thank you for a great evening.
Thank you, Worship Brother. No real announcements from Rubicon or Lexington Lodge No. 1, except I'll give you a little fun fact about Rubicon is despite the fact that we are very formal in our meetings and so forth, we do like to have a good time, and our Rubicon dinners are usually very enjoyable, especially every time Brother Cassessa comes in his purple suit. As far as Lexington Lodge No. 1 goes, we're proud to say that we've just raised 6 new Master Masons last week, and we have 600 apprentice initiations coming in the next week or two, I believe as well. We're finally starting to hopefully regain some traction that might have been lost during COVID. But we're doing the best we can and appreciate everyone's participation, especially the officers. Worship Brother Tom, would you please do the honors with the closing devotion, sir?
Sure, brethren, if you would join me. Grand Architect of the universe, ruler of heaven and earth, now that we are about to separate and return to our respective places of abode, wilt thou be pleased so influence our hearts and minds that we may, each one of us, practice those great moral duties which are inculcated in Freemasonry, and with reverent study and obey the laws which thou hast given us. Amen.
So motive be.
Motive be.
Thank you, Worship Brother. Gentlemen, friends, thank you for joining us tonight. If you know anyone that might enjoy these conversations as well, please have them RSVP, RubiconMasonicSociety.com/RSVP. Please keep all the sick and distressed in your prayers. Always trust in God with all your heart, and be a good brother to your brothers. Have a good night, everyone. Good to see you all.